give you guys a little pan around while we're getting things going here slowly. This is the forest behind our place. Bit of nature. Sure need it in a time like this. Hey everyone, nice to be back here. We have a beautiful day in Caledon, and it's such a warm, sunny day. I just had to start outside before we go into the barn and do some drawing and some painting. Thanks for coming back. For those of you who came last time, you may recall we had just a few technical challenges along the way. And anyway, I'm really excited from the tech side. I've got a brand new iPhone 11 Pro Max so that I could do this right and my battery doesn't run out. I also, you may notice, am not tied to the headphone, so I can go as far as I want and leave everyone into the forest, which has been great. So I've got my wireless mic equipment now, so I'm not always plugging and unplugging, and that's really going to come in handy later when I do a couple of these live sessions out in the field, either by canoe or painting down by a creek where I can walk around and share a bit of my process in the field. But for today, I thought I'd start in the barn and actually get into some painting a little sooner than I did last time. So without much further ado, I guess we'll just get things started here. Welcome everyone. For those who don't know, my name is CORY. I'm an artist and filmmaker, and I love to explore wild places and wild places in my own backyard as well. I love to capture them on canvas, make films from them, and to share those with the world. And at a time like this, when there is just so much negativity and sadness going on, it's just, you can't ignore it. And so, that's why I want to start by showing people a bit more nature, a bit less of me, maybe a moment of nature as we think about the horrendous stories that are going on south of the border, the continual riots and injustices being done through racism in this day and age. Sometimes as I'm painting, I wonder, it's like I'm in a bubble. But at the same time, I hope it can bring hope to other people, to think about positive things, to connect people with nature. And if more people did that, maybe, there'd be less hatred towards each other. So that's what I'm going to say about that for now. But it's heart-wrenching. So to folks who are coming in from the States, my heart goes out to all of you, but also to all those around the world who are impacted by these continual stories. So today, what are we going to talk about? I'm going to take you into the barn and share a bit of the process that I go through when I come back from an expedition. So it's been so busy since I went to the Arctic and Greenland last summer that I haven't really been able to dig deeply into what I started in the field. So what we'll do is we'll go into that process. I'll take my sketches, I'll start a painting, we'll do a variety of things, share even how I go about doing photography in the field, because somebody was asking about that before. How do I get reference? Because I don't have a photographic memory. And so therefore, there's a process to that as well. And we'll see how it goes. But first, let me just pick this up and get moving here. And I'm going to take you somewhere else. And we're going to start with that room I mentioned in the barn. So here's the barn. And the one that I never got to show you last time. That's quite important to me. So I'm going to do a little flip around here with the camera. There we go. So this is the other end of the barn. This is the barn where nothing happens too well in the studio unless I spend some time in here. So let me just open her up the other way. There we go. So here is part 2 of the barn tour. I'll keep it very brief though, because here is where I have all the fun stuff. So this is the camping gear area. This is one of my old beater canoes. This is where I come to first when I start to dream about getting out there painting and doing trips. I start digging through my sleeping bags, backpacks, more sleeping bags, tents, and piles of gear bags. It's all in here. We got paddling equipment, and then of course further on, if we come over here, we got fun stuff, all the Nalgene bottles, and the gear organized through here as well. All the extra parts for tents. Yeah, all that kind of fun stuff. And lots of paddles and stuff too. So anyway, that's a bit of the barn. But this is the other side in particular that has become very important over the last few years. And it can be a challenge. It can be a challenge to get out here. Of course, the way I approach painting has a very large physical component to it. You know, I'm out exploring, and it takes a heavy backpack to carry all my gear. And that doesn't happen without time spent in here, trying to prepare my body specifically for the task at hand. So I do as much working out as I can in here, but also by actually carrying a heavy pack out in the field so that I can have the actual muscles that are going to be engaged on a journey really worked. This gets a little tricky though in February because there's no heat in here. And so I'm fortunate to have a good buddy down the road, Ben, who joins me we try to do 3 days a week. Lately, of course, it's been on my own or with Janet. And you know, we've come out here at times when it's minus 24 degrees and we do our workouts Canadian style. Toque, gloves, you know, no matter how hard you work out, you don't even sweat. It's great. But where that really impacts me in the studio is a few years ago, I start to have arm issues, shoulder issues. And it was very disconcerting, to be frank, a little scary. I started to notice pain whenever I lift my arm up. And that's not good if you're a painter. And so you know, I kind of worked out to go on a trip, but I would come back and I would be, you know, I'd sort of fall back into just being at the easel for hours on end and not coming back in here. And finally, a few years ago, I think it was around 2015, I said, look, this is too much of my life at stake. I've got to take this seriously. So at one point, I'll turn this around. Here we go. There we are. There we go. So at one point over here, I was not able to even do a single dip because of the pain on my shoulder. So I got really concerned and I started to get really serious, and I saw my chiropractor and he gave me some great exercises to do. So anybody who's a painter out there, keep this in mind. I really highly recommend. Your body is your vehicle to express yourself. It's not just your mind. If you want to be painting into your 70s and 80s, this has to be taken care of. And so using dumbbells to do, you know, what really helped my shoulder specifically was lightweight dumbbells, straight up, 45s, and out to the side, and a whole variety of other stuff. So that's a whole other, there's lots of great fitness stuff out there, but that was really key to building my shoulder. And when I don't come in here for a few weeks at a time, then this starts to act up again. And so it's a real important part of my routine to try to get in here all the time and take care of that. So that's a little bit about the other side of the barn. And now we'll go into the part where the fun stuff is, although this can be fun too. There we are. So, got any questions while we're doing this, please feel free to ask, and you know, throw them out there. I'll do what I can to answer them. And let's get back into the barn. All right. There we go, we are in the barn. So last time we were in here, it's right about at this point where everything fell apart with the camera. So I'm just gonna give a quick little pan for those who haven't been here before to give you a little sense of the barn. So here we go. This is the barn. This is where we have a number of reproductions on display on this side of the barn, as we don't have enough room in the house, which is our gallery for everything. That was my edit suite off to the left. And then off to the right, we're going to get into the actual studio where get some work done. All right, here we go. Over here, we have some other stuff. I'm going to get back into the corner here. With this new iPhone, what's really sweet is it has a very wide angle on it. So, yes, we do have fun movie nights in the barn at times. So now with the wide angle, you can sort of get a better taste of everything in here. So some canvases waiting over here to get started. I have studies for those. I have some time for me to get at them, maybe later on. That big canoe, which we took to the Arctic, was wonderful. I talked about that one in the first go around in here. Some of the studies you see over here, we're going to get into this area after. Some sketches around the table. The paintings are here as we go around. All right, then I'll just, instead of moving it, I see, Rob, that they're blurry. I'll just do a shot and let it sit for a minute, and then I'll pan over a bit more. Hey, Dave. Nice to see you there. And then over here is where the easel is, and below the easel, I'm going to go down a little bit and then pause. There we go. You'll see that there's a platform. So one thing I didn't mention last time is that we had finished this room in the barn and decided I was all ready to start painting. So I set everything up, put the easel there, put the chair there, put everything in place without that platform. And immediately stuff started to roll away from me. Connection available. Okay, folks, are we still there? I just got a low network connection sign, which is really frustrating. It says I'm live again, so hopefully we are. So these are some of the paintings from up in Canadian Arctic and Greenland. I'm going to go through a bit of the process, what I do with those, and then we'll get things moving. Thank you, Mary. Appreciate that. Okay, so this is some of the paintings, and these are some of the sketches over here. So what I'm going to do is start with what I would just do normally. So I'm going to switch it around, and we're going to get my sleeves rolled up and start having some actual fun here. Okay? Let's see. There we go. Here, I'll leave the camera alone for a while. Okay, guys, so this is some of the sketches. We'll get into these momentarily. But the first thing I do when I come back from a trip is I assess what I have. And so the paintings that I've started, I might work on them a little bit more. But as you may have noticed, they all have white base. So I'm going to take an example here. This guy here, for example. I work on generally 12 by 16 panels when I'm out in the field. And so it's easier to leave them in the box with the extra white. I'll paint a line top and bottom. And now when I'm back in the studio, I'll actually determine the actual boundaries of the painting and then cut it. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go through that process and bring the camera in a little closer and see how that works. All right. So I'm going to put a big board down here, because I don't want to cut my table. And I've got my safety glasses and a big utility knife and, of course, a steel ruler. Okay, so I've got to decide where I'm going to cut this painting off. So one of the factors that makes that decision is determining where I want the paint. Right about there. So I'm going to mark this. I'm going to add a bit more to it just to be on the safe side, because I can always trim it down more later if I have to. All right, maybe 1/8 of an inch right there. Now I'm going to measure it back from the top, 1 1/4 inches. There we go. This connection is continually coming and going. I'm going to go steal Janet's phone and see if I can't connect. So I think we're live again. Thanks for coming back, Kenny. Hey, Louise, all the way from Monaco. Welcome back. Bike over to the house. I had to steal Janet's phone, bring it back here, put it on personal hotspot, take this phone, and then get the Wi-Fi connection from her hotspot. But that wasn't working, so I had to take her phone over by the window, and now it's sitting over by the window, and it seems to be getting a better connection, feeding the connection to here. So we're back. I have now determined the boundaries of this painting in progress that I began from a ship up in the Arctic, between Canada's Arctic and Greenland last summer. I've drawn my line across the top, factoring in a little extra space for the frame that's going to come on it later on. And now, by the way, for those who missed last month's live chat, the surface I'm painting on is actually Belgian linen. It's very fine grade, and it's mounted onto 1/8 of an inch Baltic birch, which has a shellac on the back to keep it from warping, and these fit into my paint box really well. So now with safety glasses in hand and ruler, steel ruler, I'm going to carefully cut the painting to the final size. And this is always a dicey move, so I'm going to focus on this because it doesn't happen all in one shot, because I'm cutting through wood and I'm going to have to do about 5 or 6 strokes before it goes all the way through. I'm just grabbing a piece of paper over here to put on the canvas, and the ruler I'm going to place on the side so that if I veer off the ruler, it's going to go into the useless piece and not cut across into the painting. But I need to apply a great deal of pressure here onto the board. And so I really spread my, I'm going to get up on the table and do this, right? Not take any chances. And now we're going to get her all lined up. Get my X-Acto blade locked in place really good. And now carefully draw the first line, cut the first line, and now just start doing it over and over again with slightly more pressure each time. Of course, I'm cutting through the canvas, which is easy, but cutting through the birch plywood takes a lot more weight, and you want to be careful you don't slide off onto your fingers, that's for sure. So here we go, a little harder yet. And harder. And you kind of start to feel it go through. There we go. Almost there. I'm feeling little bits at a time here. All right. There we go. And it splits. So that is now garbage. Do the other side quickly. I'm only going to do this one as a demonstration. Of course, I'm not going to do them all right now. But this is a very important part of the process because it's also a creative part of the process when I'm trying to decide if the composition I came up with in the field can be improved upon. And I try to use every chance I have to improve upon the composition. If I can, even at this stage here, that looks so mundane as just cutting the board. It's a creative decision. Where do I make this line? How does that impact the negative space on the painting? It's all part of the process that I really spend a lot of time on. Yeah, and it is a bit of work actually. I wouldn't want to use a skill saw or anything mechanical. Just a blade seems to be the nicest because it leaves a really nice clean edge as well with the knife blade. Now I will fuss with that just a little bit more. I may have a little raised edge right here, which you probably can't see, but because the blade has pushed on the material, it's created a little uplift. So I'm going to take part of the blade right here, and then I'm going to run that along like this at a 45 degree in each direction, and that's going to create a smooth edge here. And that's important because as I'm painting, my brush will come down along the edge, it'll catch that edge, and the paint will start to build up. And so I just like to finish it off that way. All right, there we go. Smooth it off. The back's a little rough. I may take the blade side as well. And just give it a little 45 to get rid of the loose wood edge as well. Okay, so this painting is set to go back on the shelf. It's set to get more work done on it. But for now, I'm going to set it back on the shelf so we can move into some of the sketches. So change gears here. That is one of the, there we go, one of the less glamorous duties in the studio that I have to deal with when I get back from a trip. Everyone gets that treatment. Move this board. All right. So when I'm in the field, the ideal scenario for me is to start a painting on location. There are times when I don't have time for that. And that's when I start doing some sketching. So I'll turn over to the sketches here and talk about those for a couple minutes. The knife out of the way. And I'm going to move the camera around a little bit too, so you can get a better view. And then I promise I will leave it so it doesn't stay blurry. So I'm going to mount it onto my jib here. There we go. Hey, Janice. And let's get this pointed down. All right, so we can talk about sketches a bit. So here's the sketches. So on occasion on that trip in particular, I had to start more sketches than I normally do when I'm out actually on a regular expedition where I'm actually hiking with my backpack and camping, because I was on a ship and the ship moved a lot. So of course I didn't have a chance to really stop the ship, although I did once. And so I'm going to bring it in a little closer here so we can talk about these. So on some occasion I will do a sketch with the intention of creating a painting from it. On other occasions, I will actually do a sketch just for the sake of sketching. So what's the difference? Well, I guess for me, it's the initial response to the scene. And when I see something that has the right light and color and potential composition, I start to draw it with the idea in my mind that it may become a painting sometime. So, for example, there's this piece here. And this is just off the coast of Greenland, this coastline with the iceberg, and there were dramatic clouds and color, which are difficult to come across in a sketch. But again, it serves as a starting point for me in the field. There were instances like this guy here. Let me bring the camera a little closer. There you go. Where I was sitting at the edge of the beach before we left, and I pulled out my sketch pad, without any intention of this ever becoming a painting. I love the waves, the rocks, and everything else. So I decided to start sketching it just to capture it, to capture the memory of being there, to create a little something from there. And as a sketch, I will intentionally leave the edges often just free-floating, without any intent of creating an actual composition that has defined edges to it. And for me, a painting, when I'm sketching for a painting, I'm very much thinking of the boundaries of how is it going to fit within the canvas itself later on. So I have other sketches like this, which are more a study in the texture of this rock face, the incredible band that was coming across this huge granite wall. Now you'll notice also they're not very dark. In the field, I don't tend to go very dark. I try to keep that for back in the studio. Again, the opportunity to maybe not totally commit to that in the field gives me a chance to change a bit more of it back in the studio. I want to capture everything I can when I'm out there, but when back in the studio, I want to also still have the opportunity to punch those darkest darks. And practically speaking, if I go too dark in the field, those darker tones will start to smudge. And that makes it very difficult to bring back anything that looks like a drawing. So there's another piece here. This one here, it was a quick sketch in the field when I started it, of these two icebergs at the edge of Greenland, and I just had to keep racing back because of we had to get back to the ship. But again, a sketch allows me to get something going. This doesn't look like a whole lot, but I got the outline going, and this is from the bow of the ship early in the morning when everybody was sleeping. I went up to the top deck, and there had to be, I don't know, 40, 50 mile an hour winds, or kilometer an hour winds anyhow. And I pulled up my sketchbook and got this island as we were just cruising past it. It kept changing positions and changing angles. But I love the big dynamic shapes in it. And this guy here, let me change that again, straight down a bit more. Oops, my camera came off the thing, hold on. Hey, there we go. More tech fun. Yes, I take photos, and I'll get to that momentarily. I'm actually going to talk. Oh, there we go. Sorry, guys. So I'm going to quit the stream and start it again real quick, but this time it'll only take about 1 minute. Thanks. I think we're going for a new record here of how many times can we disconnect in one session. But we're back yet again. Somebody said they couldn't see the drawing last time, so I will hold it up here. There we go. So this is the one that I'm interested in developing into a painting later as well. There, you can see it a little bit there. So some of these sketches will become paintings. These sketches will all get a little bit more work. I'm going to do the final darks on them, and when they're all said and done, the ones that I deem as compositions in and of themselves will become final drawings that I will frame up and make available in our gallery for others. At times when, like in this case, we have a number of clients that were part of my trip up north, I often will give them first choice over these, especially if there's a painting that accompanies it, because then they have the opportunity to have the inspiration of the sketch from the field to go along with their original painting. So afterwards, anything that's available beyond that becomes available to others. So these are some of the sketches. So what I'm going to do is head over to my sketching table, work for about 5-10 minutes on a sketch, talk a little bit about the sketching process, and then pull out a panel and start a painting. All right. So here we go. I'm going to swing you around to the sketching table. And let's hope this will be a big blur for a moment. And let's hope indeed that we do not have camera fall off again. There we go. Here's the sketching table. Okay. And here is the painting that I'm looking to start today. So I'm going to revisit the sketch a little bit more first. Let's see here if we can get that up where you can see it. There we go. All right. Can you guys see that okay? That work okay? All right. So this was off the edge of Greenland. And what really attracted me was not just the iceberg, but the composition of the iceberg, this larger iceberg with the smaller iceberg, but the rocks in the foreground, the way they split it up, it was a really nice balance of smooth rocks and contrasting jagged icebergs. And as you'll see, I'll get into talking about the reference and how I do the photography, the color as well really struck everything. So in the field, I would have worked on it. When I start to develop things further in the studio, I'm basically reaching for the same kit that I use when I'm in the field. So in the field, I'm going to use, generally speaking, an HB pencil. I will bring a 2B with me, and between those two, that does everything pretty much, or a 2H sometimes to start things off and keep things a little lighter. So as we have it, my 2H is in my hand. Yep, there's a 2H. Get in there and start to deepen some of my tones, balance them out a little bit more. And here is where I'm going to get some more darks. I'll have to bring my reference up so we can see that. I'll show you my reference momentarily. And there we go. All right, so as soon as we're talking about reference, I guess I should point the camera over there a little bit in a minute. Okay, so I will start with 2H often, keep my lines light. I try not to erase very much when I'm in the field or back in the studio, just on occasion. I use a lot of very light-handed touch. I try to hold my pencil far away so that as I get into sketching, I'm never committing too hard to a single stroke at a time. Only save that to the end because I can't go backwards with it. So these rocks in through here in the foreground are going to create a nice contrast to the background. It brings some detail. And what I really like about having these rocks really close in the foreground is that it's going to create a lot of depth, I think, in the painting as well. We have these sharply defined rocks. We've got this middle layer. We've got icebergs. We even have a distant layer on the horizon. Maybe you can see that little iceberg way, way back there, which gives me an opportunity to show depth. And it's one of the big things that I'm always aiming for, is to create a real sense of depth, a sense of being there, a sense of a presence, of seeing far into the scene. I'll often hold my pencil this way when working water and so on, because I'm really trying to keep things loose. And the overhand grip allows me to focus more on shape, big shapes, and not focus so much on details. It's a bit looser. When I started drawing years ago, back in college, well, before college, but when I really got serious about it when I was younger, I tended to be really kind of focused on the detail level of things. Starting with a 4H and then a 2H pencil. The 4H is hard, 2H gets a little softer, and so on. But then years later, when I kind of returned to drawing, I thought, can I approach drawing with more of the approach of a painter, worry more about forms overall and shapes. And so that's what I tend to do more nowadays. I'm really trying to lay in the idea and the tones and worry about the final little minute details later on if I need them at all. So that's part of the approach I have to it. Okay. Clouds and sky, I like to try to bring those in as well. Again, by holding the pencil way far back, especially for a light touch up in the sky, I can indicate sky from a very low angle and just get a really quick stroke in there that allows me to get a light tone. Because I've got to take what's in full color, the blue sky, and basically translate it into black and white as the process of drawing. So if you slow it right down and do a stroke, I'm actually pressing a little harder here and getting lighter as I get further up. And that allows me to have this feathered, sort of lighter touch that fades off. And as a sketch, again, I'm not worried like a painting about having the tonality go right to the edge and have a hard edge. I like the sketch sort of bleeding to white in different areas. It's one of the fun things about drawing that I sort of treat differently than my paintings. So that's a couple thoughts about sketching. If you, I'm just going to turn the camera back up. There we go. Hey, I'm back. Almost back here. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about drawing, I did do, there we go. I did on my YouTube channel a little sort of step-by-step process of sketching up in the Arctic a couple of years ago. So there's a little series there about that. Now, I said I would talk about reference. So let me back this up a little and actually talk about camera gear first, because somebody else was asking me about that too. All right. There we go. Okay, camera gear. So I got to roll out of the way so I can get away from this camera a little bit. So this is my full camera gear when I'm in the field. There we go. I carry a low pro top loader. This allows me to clip to my chest my bag, and I clip it to my backpack. And this allows me to have my camera gear available at any time when I'm out in the field. Although I could carry much, better quality gear than what I'm using, this gear is more than sufficient for those who, I say better quality, for those who are pro photographers, you know what I mean. There's better quality gear than this. But this really does about everything I need it to do in terms of compact size, being able to carry with me everywhere in the field, and to be able to quickly access it in and out with one hand. And this is a camera, yeah, of course it's a camera. It's a Canon 80D. The 80D, along with this 18 to 135 millimeter lens, gives me most everything I need for reference almost any time. I do carry a longer lens, 70 to 300, and the 70 to 300, of course, is fantastic when we come across wildlife opportunities. And we're capturing detail when I'm in the field. I only shoot RAW with the camera, and if you're not familiar with RAW is a format that gives you a lot of flexibility. So if you make a shot too light, the detail is still there, and you can get it later on. Or you can bring it all back. So if I take a picture of something and the sky is white, and yet I saw clouds with my eyes, then I can bring all those details back from the clouds, or most of them, most of the time. And so that is a real key thing, RAW, and with this particular gear. The other thing I do, though, artistically, is I will purposely try to bring this out here, let's see, to set it up to about, hey John, to about 50 millimeters. Now, if I'm fairly close to a scene and I go to take a picture of it, I often can't get it all in. And if I go just to the wide angle version of it, it's going to distort what I'm seeing. And so I may take some shots like that, especially for skies and so on. But when I want to gather reference that I'm really looking to maybe, this scene has potential as a painting, I will turn my camera vertical and I will zoom in to about 50 to 60 millimeters, which is similar to what your eye sees, and shoot a series of vertical shots every couple of inches. Just keep turning it, turning it, turning it. And I will take, depends how big the scene is, I might take 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. And all of these shots that I'm taking, very steady, very turned, overlapping each shot by about half, I will then stitch together as a photo in Photoshop. And this allows me then a view that is much more natural to what I saw when I was in the field, as opposed to the wide angle lens on the camera. So that's been my approach when it comes to photography. And when I bring all those photos back, also, a real key thing is being organized. Your SD cards that one uses, you'll see these guys. There we go. Each of them I number 1, 01, 02, 03. So when I'm in the middle of doing stuff, it's easy to bring them all back and sort out what I got in the studio. So that's the camera gear. It's quite straightforward, but the idea of shooting at 50 millimeters and going through the effort post in the studio is a hassle, but it really lends to, I think, reference as much more natural. And I think it leads to some of the reason why people think my work looks like very naturalistic, because it is designed for that. So it's not an L series lens because that would be bigger and heavier. That's the primary reason. You know, I do a lot of filming when I'm out in the field too. So keeping the camera gear to a reasonable size is really important, because my video gear is usually weighs a lot more than my camera gear. So I got to factor that in too. So as far as the photos afterwards, how I use them in the field, I'm going to set this up in the studio, sorry, is I still use old school Aperture. Anybody out there use Aperture on their Macs if they got a Mac? I know there's Lightroom. If there's any photo buffs out there, I'm sure I'm going to hear all about why Lightroom is better. But for what I'm doing, I found nothing better than Aperture. And for those who don't know, Aperture is a program that was discontinued at least 6 years ago. And it just is not, they stopped making it, unfortunately, which is a real shame. But for me, it is the best program still. And that's why I'll never upgrade this computer, you know, so that to a point where it can't run the old Aperture anymore. It just allows me super quick access. All my photos are in, for my reference, I sort them out from the trips and I put them in separate libraries. I'm able to open a library with a quick double click, see my imagery, zoom in, zoom out, run through them all, press F, go full screen, and it's extremely quick, and that's the biggest reason, and it allows me to really run through everything I have quickly without fussing. At this point, it's got some color correction tools, and that's one thing I will do with all my photos is, you know, the camera is only a tool. I will often take the actual photos when I'm looking at them here on the computer, and I'm going to make adjustments to them that reflect what I remember my experience seeing. And so sometimes it's bringing highlights down, sometimes it's shifting the color. Maybe it was actually warmer, but the camera made it look cold. And as much as possible, I really want the photos to be a tool that sort of support my experience when I'm out there. So good old Aperture is the way to go. I continue using that. So that's a bit about photography, and of course in Photoshop, which I don't actually have on this computer, I do it on my other computer in the office, is how I stitch them together. But if you haven't stitched photos together, I'm sure you could find it on YouTube, or if somebody really wants to know, you'll ask me and we'll share some details later on. Okay, so with that in mind, I've got reference my sketches, I got paintings I've started in the field. This is a case where I'm now going to start a painting of this scene, of this sketch, which began out there, onto a fresh white canvas. And I'll turn the camera over to this direction, so we can start that process. And I'll be able to look at the camera a little bit more from this angle, so if you've got any questions, please feel free to fire them off, and I'll do my best to answer them along the way. There we go. Hey, Norma Jean, hi. All right. Okay, so we have on the easel a painting. Okay, so this is obviously not the painting we're going to do now. This one is almost done, and so this is what's on the easel right now. As of yesterday, as of this morning, I'm going to tweak it a bit more. I think I can zoom in a little so you can see. There we go. And what's left to do on this piece, I guess I'll share a bit about that. There we go. There's not a lot left to do, obviously, other than signing it. There we go. I'm finding that the area up in here is a little flat still. And so I'm building from sort of those deeper, rich tones of the sun catching this rock face and building them up from darker to lighter. So I'm going to be bringing a few more highlights in here that have a bit more of the glow in it. And I want to differentiate some of these facets within the rock face. Also down and through here, you know, the sun is catching the snow and there's a sparkle that's in there that I haven't gotten to yet. So I'm going to be bringing up a bit more of that orange, the glows, and some of the sparkles in along the way. I've got the reflection working through in between it. This was from the trip I did with our daughter Sydney in 2018, and it was just an incredible experience. We had a boat over here that I traveled with Billy Arnikuk from Kikatarjuak, and we got onto this ice floe, and there were these little frozen pools. Some were open, and you could just sort of break the surface of the ice and drink it right from there. It was just wonderful, and the evening just was so peaceful. It just continued to, the sky became pink, and it was just so quiet, and then when you turn to your left, you could see across the ocean forever. And so this is my memory. I started this on the ice floe, and it's just so wonderful to sort of relive these memories as I'm painting. So after I play with it a bit more, this will become the second last painting that's going to go into the Arctic Coffee Table book. So we're still working on that. This one's going in, and there's another piece, and then that's it. Oh, connection again. Connection issues. Jenny, yes, well, we're still working on that. We have, Jenny's asking about our last film, Into the Arctic Awakening, when it might be coming out. And we are working very hard on that. We have a company called Distribution 360, who's our official distributor. And they are fielding it around to a variety of networks right now, including sort of National Geographic and a whole bunch of other ones. And they're looking at it, they're giving their feedback. I can't say much right now, but there's some interest from some of the networks. And that is a process that after they review it and decide from their head of documentaries if they're going to take it, then we deliver it to them, and eventually it goes to air. And until we nail down the actual that process in which broadcasters are going to be carrying the film, we're not allowed to really come out with it on DVD, I'm afraid, or Blu-ray. So that's why there's been a delay in that. But once we go through this process in the coming months, we'll be able to start announcing which networks will be carrying it where. And that'll be, I'm excited to get it out in the world after. It's probably one of the longest films in the making to finally get out somewhere into the public. Well, thank you, Jenny. All right, so I'm basically just mixing up a bit of blue, blue-brown, a bit of sepia tone, a bit of indigo, and I'm going to be focusing over here for a bit. I'm still going to be answering questions as much as I can, but really the first stage of the painting is so important. So you've seen the sketch. I set it aside for now because I don't want to get paint on it over here, and I have to decide now, did what I do in the sketch, sorry, I'll put it here so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. You know, the sketch, I have no boundaries. I have no top, I have no bottom, left or right. And that's fine. As a sketch, I love leaving it just moving off in different directions. So I've got to decide, turning this into a painting, what is the actual composition going to be as it relates to the edge of the frame, the edge of the canvas, the actual shapes, the boundary within which I'm going to work. And so I really like to keep it here. Maybe, there you go, you can see it a bit more. I'll just be careful. I'll try not to get paint on it. There you go. I'll go slow. So the first strokes are always the most challenging and the most fun. Decide where. Well, this shape is probably not going to work for what I'm looking at here. So I'm going to ignore the top and bottom and start focusing on the actual center and probably the main line through here to get things started. It might be a little high, actually. I want to make sure that there's headroom above that iceberg tip. So. There we go. I want to probably try to use the full width of the canvas, though. I'll be cutting off top and bottom. I will send the greetings along to Janet then. Great. Oh, it's okay, Catherine. It's probably good that you're late because we had to cut the stream twice due to technical challenges of country internet. But we're back and we're settled in here a little, so I think we should be good for a while. So I want to keep this light, loose, and I'm just going to squint a lot. I'm going to squint right now. I'm going to squint because I really want to see the big shapes. I don't want to focus on the little stuff. I want to see how things interrelate to each other. And I'll zoom in on here a bit more so you can see just what's going on. I lay markers down along the way. Sort of the edge of the rock starts here and here to translate it into the space that I'm working on. Kind of approach it a bit like sculpting in a way. I'm sort of taking big shapes and just sort of cutting outside. It's like a big block of clay, if you will. Like these rocks coming in the foreground. Now, whereas these rocks sort of fade off the side of the page, here they're actually going to be sort of integral as the rocks sort of meet the edge of the frame. So they're going to create a different balance in the piece than they do in the sketch. And so I want to bear that in mind too. How much of that I want to show. If the rocks become too big here, if I keep going, then they may sort of fight with the iceberg and become too important in the composition. So now I'm going to decide how much balance I want top and bottom again, and it's back again. Wow. Well, I guess this is how I was going to go with the connection. Not much we can do about it. So as you may have seen, I'm doing all this with, where is it? This brush right here. This is a, I showed this one last time. Let's see if I can get it to focus. Maybe not. Can you see it? There we go. Anyhow, this diagonal brush, I really like it for starting a painting because it really gives me a sharp edge that I can develop with. And there's a flat area that I can start to do things with as well and start to knock things in. So I'm going to step back from it. I'm going to look at it in the mirror. I'm going to determine the worst thing to do at this stage is to rush it too much. And if I rush it too much, it's a lot more work later to fix it. So it's really my goal here to take some time with it and play with the compositions, squint a lot, and see if this is going to work for me. And it's about the masses. It's about this big mass here, this rock, which I like there, how it balances against this iceberg. the shape that's created and lets the eye flow through here and around. And then there's some wave action coming into the foreground that's kind of slick. Doesn't have to, of course, I'm painting in oil, so what I really like is that I can just continue changing things as long as I want. To a point. I eventually got to get it done. So I think at this point I'm kind of good with this general direction to start getting some more paint a little thicker on here. Oh, let's see here. There's this mountain back here that actually elevates up. By having a variety of different references to work off of, I can see, clouds moved, they came and they went. And initially, the mountain came down like this, but then the clouds came out and obliterated a lot of the mountains, and it created a much nicer shape in through here without sort of it becoming a dominating, competing element to the iceberg itself. So the clouds are going to kind of move in through all that, and maybe a bit of the mountain's going to peek through. That's about all. And the sun's coming from here, so it's creating some really lovely contrast on the iceberg itself. Okay, I'm going to move this up a little higher because I'm going to start throwing a bit more paint around, and I don't want to get paint on there if I can avoid it. So there we go. Well, you're welcome, Faith. All this technical stuff is feeling like a letdown. But hey, c'est la vie. So as long as this is you guys are finding this useful, then I'm glad to do it. And share a bit of the process. And do feel free, if you're an artist, to ask any questions about the process. But I'm going to especially focus on just diving in and getting the painting going here. So I'll keep sneaking over every once in a while and seeing how that's working out. Now, I often will, where do I start? What's the beginning point? What's the first strokes I want to do now that I've got it kind of roughed in? It can go almost anywhere, but because the iceberg is white, I'm not going to start with the white of the iceberg. I'm going to sort of cut in around it with the outside and see how that goes first. Clean my brush off a bit, sort of define the shape. One thing I really do that's, I guess, probably about, I don't know, maybe it's 50-50. I don't think anybody's ever actually done a survey, but you will find that, because I've watched a few other people's videos and how they paint, I'm always curious to see, and what can I do to improve my own style and technique, is that you'll see some people will paint just the sky and then just the middle and then the foreground. I don't understand that myself personally, so I'm not going to be doing that at all. Big shapes done. Now you work tones within tones, needed colors. Yeah, I'll talk a bit about the colors I'm using. My focus is to really try to start the whole painting kind of at the same time. Keep it all moving. I'm going to start here, I'm going to move there, I'm going to go there, and to try to bring it up as a cohesive unit. This is actually something that an old teacher of ours in college alluded to, I remember, and we had to do something once, and I found it frustrating, but she said, look, the way I want you to start your painting is I want you to actually put a dot of color in each section that sort of matches what you think it should be, and just kind of work it all over. Maybe my approach sort of developed out of that, but I think it's just more the idea of trying to bring it all up naturally so there's a cohesive flow to it. And so I'm going to take some titanium white, some cerulean blue, and maybe just a touch of ochre. And I showed my palette closely last time, but you can sort of see it down there again. There we go. And I'm going to get a bit of this tone going for the sky and just start shaping things around here a bit. And that's where the fun kind of begins. You can sort of, it's all fun, but it's fun and focus. And scary, because I'm always hoping that, whatever I start here, will it in the end kind of do justice to the idea and the experience I had while I'm out there. And that can be a daunting task. And it always starts out the same kind of way. And through the process, I don't know. I don't know sometimes if it's really going to work out, which is why I like to set it aside and move on to other pieces and then keep going and then come back to them. And with enough perseverance, eventually, things start to come together. And then, of course, not all paintings are created equal. They don't all work out the quite the same as one hopes. But to me, it's the process. It's the effort of really trying to connect and put everything you have into something as authentically as possible. And whatever it is, it winds up being. So what I like about doing this is I can actually kind of carve, refine some of these shapes that I have in the background that I kind of alluded to. Now I can kind of I'll pick up a bigger brush when it comes to more of the sky, but I want to start smaller so I can just, this is going to be the main focal point of the painting, will be these icebergs, obviously. So I'm going to start with a bit of a smaller brush so I can get these shapes in and work them out. I'm going to get some darker tones, start to develop some darker tones of the water. Again, I'm going to come back to that and I'm going to work it. I'm going to let it dry. I'm going to work over it again. It's all about sort of starting to bring the image together in front of me. Zoom back in a bit. So I can use the water again to help sort of clean up my initial rough idea and give it a bit more form as I go along. Keep preparing that back to my sketch, which is over here. I'm painting very thin. It's not watery, but it's a thin layer. I don't like a lot of texture in my paintings because I really want to focus on creating the illusion of going into them. And if you have to paint, for me, at least the way I approach it, it sort of creates an attraction to the surface of the canvas through the shadows and highlights that thick paint is casting itself, and sort of takes away from the idea of looking into the painting, because now your eye is drawn to the surface and to those areas of contrast and shadow. And so I've always focused on keeping my work fairly thin, just out of it's a support to the overall goal of the painting in the first place, which is that sense of depth. All right, I wish I did, but I don't paint. I mentioned before, I don't create Ireland. Hey, Sabine. Ireland. Oh my wife's maiden name is Moriarty. We had a trip planned this fall to Ireland finally. After being married for 25 years, we haven't been there yet, and she's never been there. Unfortunately, that's probably going to change for the time being, but we are going to get there, and I am going to be bringing my paintbrushes because it looks lovely, absolutely lovely out there. So I look forward to painting in Ireland someday. So I'm starting to work on the water a bit more in the foreground. Just going to, again, I'm kind of squinting and creating the big masses all together. Also trying to go with the flow of the water and which way it's actually moving, sort of start to indicate some of the shapes of the waves and so on. The direction of the strokes are, even though I paint smooth, the direction of the strokes really sort of tell the story, especially when it comes to things that are moving like water. I'm going to knock back my blue with a bit of orange and sort of create some shapes there. So the rocks are starting to come together. Well, thank you very much for the offer, Sabine. I will check check these notes after and jot those down, see where that is. And then our water. Now this is one of these things. So in the corner, the rocks come this way, right? And maybe, like in my reference, which is over there, the photos, doesn't really matter. They want to lead right to the corner of the composition. Now that, because this is, remember, this is where I'm going to cut my board off later. That's always been a killer for me. And so I really avoid lines coming right from the corner, unless your goal is to draw the eye right to the corner. I find that that's a composition killer. And because instead of focusing over here, the leading line, along with the line of your boards, which are very, again, these are integral to your composition. They're not just the outside of the painting. They make up a major part of it. And so having this creates an arrow. Boom, boom, and then your line. And what does an arrow do? It makes you look right there. And so that is really not something I'm trying to do with the work. I want to lead the eye into the things that I find most important in the painting, and this very corner of the painting is not one of those. And so I will change the composition to either break out of the bottom a little bit or to break up here. And in this case, I think I'm going to break it out of the bottom a little bit because I already have water coming all the way across the background here, and it creates another long skinny line down through here, and I'm not liking the balance that's creating, so I'm going to just make sure that my rocks sort of break out of the bottom of the painting before they hit the corner, probably in this area here, and have the water come along. So that's composition. Oh, there we go. The alarm finally. All right, so cover the ground, cover the ground. That's the key for me, is to cover the ground right now. Get paint on as much of the panel as possible so I can start to get rid of all that daunting white. But have that paint also be useful. Have it define, actually move it along in the painting. I don't know, for those who are joining, I don't know if you're aware, this is the first time I've ever, I think, really started a painting live. I'm kind of used to doing this out on my own. Yeah, sometimes often making films, but that's different because we can get snippets along the way. So this is something new for me. But it's a fun challenge. And I hope it's educational or useful on some level for those of you out there, or maybe even entertaining. Okay. Okay, so I've had enough of this color. I'm going to go up here maybe. I'm going to take a bigger brush and just, cover that area quickly. Got to reach over here. Those who missed my brushes last time, there they are. I got a few of them over here. There. There we go. Sip of coffee. It's cold, but it's still good. So there's a little painting table with all the brushes. So I'm going to grab something sizable just to cover the rest of that canvas. Maybe one of these guys here, a big filbert. It's not a, this filbert is not a, it's not a hog hair and it's not a sable. It's in between the two. So it doesn't leave a really thick stroke, which I like. I can cover a lot of ground at the same time. Keep it fairly smooth, because later, at times I have actually gone through and shaved off the edges of those paints when I come back from the field, and it leaves globs on the painting, so just in an effort to keep it smoother. So I'm just wiping off the olive oil that I'd used to keep this fresh, making sure I clean it out. Now I can come over here and zoom back out and mix a bigger batch of some of that sky color. And there's no one sky color, obviously. There's a subtle gradation taking place from over here. The sun's coming from over here. There's some light cerulean blue. As it moves off, it's a little bit deeper up in the sky. But what it's not, and I try to avoid, is the kind of blue deep in the sky that you get in a lot of travel photos. You know, we're using polarizers, and the blue is just so blue. It's unreal. And so I found in the Arctic especially, a lot of the skies aren't that deep, dark azure. They're lighter tone, but pure kind of. So I don't want to go too dark up in the sky on this particular occasion, or too deep a blue. So I will go a little bit more, and I need a lot more white paint. There we go. Now I can. And I'm often adding a touch of yellow, especially towards the sun, where it's a little bit warmer, into the blue, so that the blue isn't too cold. Like you see, there's a bit of a reddish tone there. Maybe you can't see that through the camera, but I'm going to mix in a bit more and a touch more yellow, warm it up a little bit. So it's actually becoming a slight bit greenish, especially in a warmer area near the sun. And look at that. One thing in using areas like this is I do wind up using a lot of paint and a lot of white. So I've got to take a bunch more titanium white to replenish. There we go. Just like with the pencil, I try to hold the paintbrush, you'll notice, quite a ways back. I want to paint from the shoulder, the arm, not just from the tips of my fingers, to try to keep the strokes a little looser at the beginning and moving around more quickly. This will be the first of at least 2 coats in the sky, maybe 3, maybe more. And I notice now I'm starting to see that with this amount of blue in the sky, it's starting to take on a little too much importance in the composition. And so even though I drew that line there originally, I'm starting to reassess that now and say, you know what, now that I'm seeing it up there, it's pulling my eye too much into that big void. And so I'm going to reassess and cut that down a little further yet. Something like in that neighborhood. And so I said, that's going to be my edge a bit more. I'm going to look back in the mirror too. I got a mirror at the other side of the room. And just sort of see how that compares. Kind of deepen that sky a little more up there. Again, the left side, it's the sun's over there, so I often will have a bit of a transition because I'm seeing it in real life, where the sky, as it gets a little further away, will be a little more pure blue, a little deeper. And now I'm leaving space here because I've got some clouds that'll be coming in a little bit too. All right, so that's my clouds. I'm going to leave a little bit of space for clouds. Of course, I can bring those back in. Okay, now I'm going to start to knock some of these rocks in. The iceberg's going to be fun, but I'm going to hold off on the iceberg just because I want to get some of the other tones in first and some of the darkest darks in here as well. So that's really a big part of trying to establish darkest darks and lightest lights, as Maxime would say, our teacher in college. It was very good training. trying to, early on in the process, say where are the darkest tones going to be and where are the lightest ones. So you always have that to relate to in the painting as you move through it, and not just go darker and darker at some point, because everything is going to relate between your darkest and your lightest tones on the painting. So if you establish them early enough, at least some spots of it, it gives you a better sense of how to handle middle tones and so on. So I'm going to work on these rocks a little bit and try to knock some of those in. I'm taking some indigo blue, a bit of sepia, creating a darker tone that's not too rich. You know, the deep shadows of the rocks, I don't want them to have colors that are too strong because I want them to recede into the shadow. And so I'm going to start off and see how this works. Now this is where I may pull out my handy stick, which I showed last time. That was made from a broomstick that I carved, I don't know, 30 years ago. Because these strokes are defining something pretty strong here, and that's these rocks. And it gives me a little more stability to lean on this, as you can see. It's a little bit thin. I'm going to thicken it up a little bit. I don't want it runny. I want it thick enough that it's got some opacity to it. And that's what I like about this, again, the shape of this brush. It's a sable brush. It's actually very smooth. So it can allow me to keep my darks flat but deep. Let's see here if that makes. So this is where squinting is really, really critical. Trying to really focus on shape. Not that I'm painting a rock as much as I'm painting a shape of color. Yeah, Barb, we've been having tech issues the whole time, I'm afraid. We only have a cell phone connection out here in the barn. And so the blurring seems to be happening pretty regular. So sorry about that, guys. The town of Caledon is working very hard. Of course, we're here in Caledon. Well, if it's you, perhaps it depends. Are you drinking wine already? It's been a big issue in the town of Caledon. They're working very hard to try to get better internet for people who live out in the country. Farmers, of course, rely heavily on the internet for all their work. And so Mary Thompson's been working hard on that. And as we go along and the Caledon Public Library opens up again, then they have a hotspot that we're able to loan out for a week at a time. And that hotspot has really good connectivity. So down the road in here, I might be able to do some of those using that better internet than I have on my phone. But this is it for now. So I like this one rock. You can see the one rock over there. I don't know if you can see it in the sketch. It's kind of far away. But I'll pull it forward because it's important to me. So in this sketch, you can see this rock right here. That guy right there. He's kind of by himself in the water. And he plays an important role because it's like your eye sees this rock first as it leads into the composition. And so in the course of this painting, I might be moving this off to the left a little more, but I definitely want to make sure I keep that element in here. and decide where do I use that strategically. I can move them around wherever I want. And it's got a beautiful subtle shape to it, very round and smooth. And I don't want to line it up with the edge of the iceberg, with the edge of the rocks, and have it be here. And so that's one of the things I'm continually comparing, is where the elements align in the painting. Looking for those gotchas where sometimes things are too much, and then they wind up becoming sort of static instead of sort of your eye flowing from one object past another one and into it. And so that's one of those cases where this rock lines up right here, but then it would line up with that, it would line up with that. It's not so good. So I'm going to use that rock. I'm going to offset it a little bit over here because I really feel it can help bring things in. And as I go along, let's see, right about there. Now, as I bring it down into the composition, I'm discovering something. I love the rock here, kind of a stepping stone, sorry, bad pun, into the scene. It creates the edge that runs along here. And then this guy comes here. But now I don't have any room along the very, very bottom to let the water flow around here. So I may actually just decide to make this a little bit lower now. And this is why I never use regular standard size frames on everything, because I'm always changing on the fly. There. I think I need a bit more space now as I'm sort of playing it out to allow this rock, to allow the water to flow through it and to create kind of what I'm, the whole balance that I'm looking for here. And there's another one over here somewhere, which is kind of nice. All right, and the left side has some beautiful rock tan colors, and they're not in the sketch, but they're in there in real life. So I'm going to have to do some drawing here and actually slow down and say, where are these rocks going to be? How are they going to break up? And the edge of this brush is great for that, to break into main shape and back to the drawing kind of side of things. Just see where my outlines are. I'll go for a while. And then when it gets to a point where I start to lose control, I pull back and I start to draw stuff back in. And then I can go at it again. And then I kind of pull back and readjust my drawing side, drawing, of course, painting drawing, and make those determinations along the way. That's why I would never be a good watercolor painter, ever. Let's see here. There's some nice shapes in through here. This rock comes around here. There's another one here. Shadows. This rock has a big shadow, and I love the way the shadow in this case, this one off to the left here. I'll point the camera so you can see what I'm referring to. Let me talk about rocks for a second here. I'm going to turn the camera. Hopefully it won't fall off. To my reference. Of course it may. Let's see here. There we go. All right, I'm going to zoom in on this. Give me a sec. We'll talk rocks for a second, what I'm trying to do over here. There. Rocks. There we go. So what I'm working on is this corner over here. I was talking about this rock I really like as an anchor point in the foreground to sort of break up this mass. Gives you something for the eye to lead into the painting. It drops on that rock initially because it's nice and close in the foreground. This mass sort of creates a flow that leads you down to the right, and then of course it kind of goes back through the rocks and back and forth. And it's all parts of a composition that can help create depth, because I can put detail into these rocks in the foreground and let that detail become more soft as it goes into the background. So it's a great lead in that way. So what I'm working on is the detail in these rocks here, and I love the shape of this rock. And I like the way there's a shadow here. And this shadow, I'm actually going to position. You see this is a very wide panoramic kind of view. My composition isn't so. But I like to really have my reference reflect the surrounding area beyond the edges of the painting, because this allows me, when I'm at this stage, to look around further as I would in real life and say, I don't want this element from here. Oh, no, I want this one from over here. I can pull things into the painting as I would in the field. And so I'm seeing this rock over here. I'm liking this shadow as I start to butt up against the side of my page. And I love that because this shadow going off the page will create an area on the side of my composition that'll lead you right into it as well, just in a small way. And if you got enough of these small things, they all add up. So I may take elements of these rocks and elements of some of these, and in my composition, I may wind up shortening that a little bit. We'll see. Not to be afraid to do that, because this is all I'm making a painting and not a photo. So back to here, so you know what it's referring to. And here's that shadow I was talking about right here. That rock sort of comes along. I'm going to switch to another brush so I can actually paint draw a little bit more with. There we go. I will use something like this. I'll show it to you a second. There it is. Oop, a little tiny filbert, which doesn't want to focus, but there we go. A little filbert. There we go. This is a great tool for drawing and for smaller details too. And now that I'm into some, I've got to decide what I'm going to do with them. And once I sort of get past this phase of sort of reassessing and getting a little more sort of control over an area like this, then I can pull out the other brushes and start laying in my colors into these areas and filling them out. So, but it's worth spending 5-10 minutes to sort this out first to make sure that I'm on the right track before I start laying the thicker paint in, which is going to have more white in it. It's going to be more opaque and harder to change around. At this stage, I'm still kind of composing and drawing and so on and so forth. So I can get the shadows kind of happening in there. It's nice with the little filbert is I can do a little edge, but I can also just lay in some of those key shadow areas. They act as a bit of a guide as I'm painting. And this is the shadow here I was referring to on the edge of the page, edge of the canvas. Kind of comes in, down the rock, cuts across. And I love texture. I guess, these rocks remind me of Georgian Bay a little bit, and I love painting up in Georgian Bay so much over the years, and up in Lake Superior. So the texture of these rocks is something I enjoy playing with a lot, and the facets and the colors, and they're just so that guy kind of comes around. At some point, you got to make some decisions about, you're not rock. I don't need to paint every rock, but which ones are the most interesting and add to the composition that say something about this landscape the most. And none of this stuff will be in stone. So this is, sorry, it will be in stone here, but not committed to them. So again, squinting a lot, breaking, saying, what are the main shapes? Now I'm starting to get some forms. Now with these forms, I'm not going to, when I pull out those other tones, it's going to go far more quickly. And with some sort of level of control, I'll have an idea where I'm going to put these rock tones. I still like that guy there. I like this big one. I got to make sure that this guy here sort of creates an anchor coming off the corner. Let's see. Now before I talked about having my rocks come down off of here. I'm not sure about that anymore. I got to see where these are, how I wind up with this after all. I may change my mind again. Let me see, I need more paint. I have a bad habit that when I'm actually painting to keep adding thinner to it to keep the color that I have. It's like I want to extend that color. I want to keep using it. And it's like, oh, we'll just add a bit more thinner, add a bit more thinner, instead of mixing more paint. And so that becomes lazy. So I do have to remix my paint quite often. I don't do big pools. I just keep kind of going at it. So there. That guy, the shadows coming in there. This rock I talked about earlier, I'm going to move him over a little. And then it's going to come off the bottom of the page after all, just a little bit right there. There's another rock that's kind of, all right. Behind this rock is another rock that kind of comes up. I like the way it kind of leads into the background. So I'm going to include a little bit of it here too. All right, so that kind of gives me a bit of a guide to where things may be going. Okay, that's enough of a guide to get me going along this direction here. Rocks will be a little higher here. And in the background, I'll go back to this brush. Okay, so it looks like a mess, but that's how it goes. A bit like writing a poem. Well, you know what? It's funny you mentioned that. Who was that? Hey, Sharon. Because I've never been a poet in particular, although I had a bit of inspiration strike me last fall as I was working on the book, and a little surprise for what it's worth, there's a little poem on the very last page of our Into the Arctic book that I wrote. Be the first poem I've written in a long time, but it just kind of came to me, and I thought, you know what? Maybe we'll include this in the book. Why not? All right, I'm going to change some colors, and I'm going to leave these rocks for a minute. Go work on this background a little bit, get some main shapes kind of happening in there. Sort of, I like to let things sit, percolate, come back to them. It's all part of the process. It's not all decisions made in one shot. So I'm going to mix up some earth tones, some greens, a little bit for the distant mountain. Now, I would often be playing music while I'm working, but it turns out that Spotify... Good timing, Robert. I was just thinking of that, and then I turned around and saw your note. Yes, I usually have a selection of music that I'm playing in the background, often film themes and so on that I have on Spotify. And just before going live today, I thought I should check if I'm allowed to do that. And Spotify doesn't let you actually run their playlists while you're doing live streams, so that can get me in trouble. So unfortunately, right now I'm playing without any music, I guess, except for the music in my head. But I'll often do that. And film scores, I think there's one just called film scores, and just like, I don't know, hours of film scores. I love those. Very emotional type music. Podcasts, yes, I'll listen to some podcasts as well. Sometimes I'll listen to business podcasts. Depends what stage of the painting I'm at. If it's sometimes I get into details and stuff like that, and it kind of gives me a chance to get caught up on some of those. Chase Jarvis Live is one. He's got some great guests on, a lot of great business ideas, and so that's one that I do enjoy. Of course, there's a number of ones out there by other artists and other guys like Eric Rhodes, who are putting his content out there all the time. Enjoy that too. He interviews a lot of other artists, so I'll listen to those sometimes. Sometimes it's just a bit of nature music. Cooler tones I'm mixing in back here. A bit more white, a bit more atmosphere, so it's not as dark and contrasty. Atmospheric perspective is a really critical component of creating any kind of realistic depth of field in a painting or feeling of depth. So understanding how atmosphere works, how it creates layers between you and the far subject, are really important elements to keep in mind if that's what your goal is with your work. And the best way to get a handle on that is to just observe it. Always look for it. Just be out there, study from life as much as possible. I think that's where, though I'm painting right now based upon a sketch that I started in the field, I think years of painting and studying in the field have been really, really beneficial in terms of getting a greater understanding of how the natural world works in terms of colors and lighting and what happens in the environment that way. And the more you do that, I think the more it gets into you, so that when you're painting, if you want to make things look more naturalistic, well, you go to the source, and that source, the more you take it in, the more it can be expressed through your work. A little bit of the mountains poking through over here. I'm going to leave that in through the clouds. Just hint at it for now. And there's a fair bit more blue I'm mixing into these distant colors. There's for that atmosphere happening there. Again, this is all just early stages. Getting the main shape, squinting, is it sort of balancing, is it working? Where is it going in that regard? And now, get some of these rocks. Oh man, that iceberg's just waiting for me, eh? Oh. All right, I gotta get a bit on the rock first, then I can start having fun with the iceberg. I always like to treat myself with an area that I particularly look forward to and leave that till a little bit later so that I can have that fun. Oops. I'll back it out a little bit. There we go. So it's kind of a bit of a treat later to come back to. So rocks, get some of these rock tones in here. I'm mixing some whites, I'm mixing some tan kind of colors, a bit of yellow ochre, touch of orange in there as well. There's also quite a bit of blue mixed into the rocks, sort of reflecting from the sky. It's always good to watch what this, if it's a blue sky, look for the blue in the reflections that are facing the sky. If you want to make things, it'll tie it to the sky. And even if you only see a hint of it, if you accentuate it a little bit, it sort of makes it feel part of it more, because in fact there is a certain amount of reflection going on there. Yeah, so I'm trying to follow along some of the comments. Obviously, I'm not seeing them all, but I will check them all out afterwards and respond to them. Once session is done, I have a chance to get on there later today and so on. But I did catch a glimpse. I think Matthew, you mentioned about the idea of the word explore and so on, and I do have a sense that it's a much more loaded word these days than it used to be, and I've been trying to be sensitive to that. And as a matter of fact, I tried to remove the word explorer from my Facebook page because it says Artist Filmmaker Explorer. And when I think of exploration, I think of going to to places I've never been before and crawling over them, walking over them, seeing things that for me are new to my eyes and maybe new for many other people. And but then there's a whole sort of history of the explorers who traveled the north in a very disrespectful way and took very much advantage of the people who lived there. And so I realized that that term is something that, depending on how you view it and who and how it's said in the context, can be very sensitive to people. I mean, people are exploring space. Is it applicable there but not in other areas? To me, it doesn't mean that I'm going to a place that has never been seen before. It's but at the same time, I'm sensitive to that. So I did try to remove it, but they wouldn't let me. And I just wanted to say artist. So I'm looking into that because I'm aware, and I'm very, I care about other people, and I really want to make sure that, especially as I started traveling the north, I wondered a lot about how would people feel about me coming from the south to come paint up in the Arctic. And I've been very, it's been a wonderful experience. I've made a lot of friends along the way. So anyhow, it's embedded in what I do to try to be respectful of other people's cultures, and that word explorer, with the history of the British exploration in the past and others, can carry very negative connotations. And so, but the word explorer, and then the idea of going to explore something, to go explore in the woods, the word is such value too, I think, if it depending how it's used, and like many words in the English language, does it need to be completely abolished? It's something to talk about. I agree completely, but when I'm talking about going to explore my local woods, it's about seeing what's under that log, but maybe seeing it fresh, and it's got nothing to do with those who abused their positions in the past. Anyway, but at the same time, as I said, it is something that I have been trying to get away from, and Facebook won't let me. But I will revisit that as well. So I hope that makes sense. Now, if these rocks, I'm sort of getting, some of these are just mid-tones. There's going to be highlights coming in, and there's some really great stuff. I love some of the transition of some of the wet rocks are kind of blue. So down and through here, these are going to have a lot more blue in them. And I love the blue purples, a little bit of Lisbon crimson mixed in with a bit of Payne's gray, mixed in with a bit of a this and that, and then I can indigo, and start to get some of a purpley tone to some of these rocks here. And especially because they were wet recently with the waves, the top's going to reflect some of that and be far more blue, which I'll come back into, especially because it's a blue sunny day. So this was, for those who are just joining, this is, I don't know if I said exactly where this is. This is Greenland. My first trip to Greenland last summer. I was on a ship for 11 days. Sadly, that company is no longer around. One Ocean Expeditions, you may have heard of their sad demise and a whole lot of other stuff. But anyway, I was fortunate to be on the ship last year, and it did open up part of the world that I'd never seen before. And it was just magnificent. Man, there's just so much to see out in Greenland as well. It started in the Canadian Arctic and then went off to Greenland. And this was during a landing where we had a chance to walk around for a few hours in the afternoon. And I kind of took off on my own and found myself doing some sketching along the way, racing against the clock, making sure that I got back in time, and managed to start at least some sketches, and had a chance to sit by myself in some places and really soak in a few views away from others. And so despite the fact that it was a group-based trip as opposed to most of the stuff I tend to do, I had opportunities for solitude, which was really wonderful, and is to me critical for to get the inspiration I need to paint. So again, not much detail at this point. Shapes, forms, squinting, squinting, squinting. Is it working? Get things together. It's all part of the slow process. All right, let's get paint on that iceberg back there. Clean a little spot on my palette because I'm going to be dipping into some whites and some blues. Pretty important to try to keep those a little cleaner. Well, I'm going to start with this shadow side. Get some of the great blues that are blues and almost blue-green that sort of are taking place in there. Love about icebergs that there's just so much variety in each of them. And it's not just white. I'm just marking the center of the page right now. Center of the composition, roughly. I try not to center things too terribly often. Occasionally it works. I mean, if I got enough stuff going around here, this is quite central. It's a little off center though. It's not dead center. With the second one, it helps break up the idea that it's somewhat central, but I do have the bulk and the weight of this iceberg off center a little bit. So if this is the middle here, this is the middle. I mean, if you can put something in the middle, that's okay, but it's really got to be a purpose and really got to be, you know, calling attention to it, saying, here I am, because it can create kind of a static flow through a painting or an image. So to me, it's really important to do it conscientiously. And here, I'm just going to probably move my berg, just even the weight of it a little bit more to the left, just a touch, as I sort of bring it in. All right, thanks, Jenny. You guys take care. I'll post this on YouTube later in case anybody wants to see in the end, but I will guarantee you the painting will not be done by the time I'm done here. So well, my goal today is to get that first pass in everywhere, sort of get it going probably for another little while, and then we can call it for today. So I know a lot of artists like to tone their canvas first. You'll see that a lot. And oh, thank you very much, Anne. The idea of toning, I've never gotten into much. I guess, especially in a case like this, where the iceberg's going to be quite white, it seems like I'm going to have to now work twice as hard to get the color back, that lighter tones, the glowing whites back over top of the darker tones. And so although I paint opaque when it comes to the lighter tones, there's still a certain amount of benefit I derive from having white underneath it. Maybe it's from years of being an illustrator, you know. I did paint on it, you know, airbrush illustrations and so on for about 20 years for ad agencies and magazines. And it was always on a white surface because I would be painting with transparent airbrush colors quite often. And I got very used to working white and getting a sense of what a color is doing next to white. And that can be one of the main reasons why people tone their canvases, is because the white can be very difficult to match against because it's so overpowering. But it's something I've kind of gotten used to. And so I've toned it on occasion, but I always come back to just working on a white canvas. But this canvas has a slight inherent tone to it to begin with, but yeah. So I'm painting shadows. So I'm going to lighten up with a bit more cerulean blue, a bit more white, some of these secondary forms. I'm going to get a thicker brush now. I'm going to pull it, now as I start to work into the whites a bit more, I'm going to start to go a little bit thicker. And so I'm going to pull out another brush. Here we go. It's like the big brush I used for the sky earlier. This is it's a Robert Simmons filbert. There it is. And again, it's stiffer than what I've been using, but not too stiff. So I can lay the paint down a little thicker. With the sable brushes that are smooth, they bend more, they're softer, so you have to sort of thin the paint down a bit more. But when I start to put the whites in, I don't want to move them around, slide them around too much. I've got to keep them covered. They really tint easily, and so I want to be careful that I lay it down and not play with it too much along some of these edges, or else I'll start to get all muddy. So it's not pure white. I'm still putting cerulean in there and a touch of yellow. And I'm still kind of blocking in big shapes. Last thing I want is to come in here with anything pure white-wise, because that would take away the opportunity to bring highlights at the end. So I'm still keeping it toned a little bit down from pure white in intensity. Not worrying about the little details yet, though I love them, as they'll come later, especially when you get into the various crevasses that are in this iceberg. And some of these subtle blues, I'm going to have to come back in and do a very slight amount of glazing to get the actual tone in there that I need. For now, it's building up. So this is where I need to keep that sky a little darker in the background. Maybe push its darkness a little bit so that there's some good contrast and you can actually see the edge of this iceberg a bit more. And that's going to come later when it dries and I put further layers into the sky. Very rough at this stage. I'm going to, before I play more, as tempting as it is to really get in there more, I'm going to move in and fill in the clouds in the background. Again, trying to keep everything. It's tempting to just stay in one spot, but I try not to stay too long. I want to move along, keep it all going, keep it all kind of dancing together and build it up. Now this cloud here, what I like about it, is it extends a little bit past this iceberg. And what's beautiful is that that's going to create a nice little area of contrast. So that iceberg will have a dark tone against it. So it's called local contrast. And it allows, sort of, I can play with this. And it's a cloud, so I can make it longer if I want, whatever. And by doing so, create an area where this iceberg will stand out against it a bit more as I work it later on. So these are some of the decisions I'm making on the fly. Is this cloud goes here? Yeah, but maybe I can just go ahead and take artistic liberty and make it stretch across a little further and use that so that more of the iceberg has sort of a foil to stand out against. I also like that the cloud up here, there's another layer behind it that the sun is catching, and sort of bring a bit more light up into that corner of the painting. Ooh, not that much, but maybe a little less. pull out another brush. And I start with one brush, and eventually I have a whole big pile for some reason. But this time I want to start to get a few more edges, so I'm pulling out a round brush, which is also a, there it goes, a synthetic. So again, I can lay strokes down a little bit thicker, especially on this iceberg, because I'm losing the edges, I'm losing the whites. So you can't really see them against the background anymore. We had the white of the canvas showing through, which made that more visible earlier. But that's all right. We'll pull them back as we go along, and as it dries, which is why this is going to take more time, because I'll need to come back in after it dries to do some of that. Trying to recover some of these edges. The white's too strong probably, but for the time being, I'll let it dry this way, then I'll have that to work back over later on. Because I'm finding it a little too pure. I like it to have that little light blue in it, but I'm going to come back into this water now. Again, never one spot for too long. And bring some of the bit of the wave action into the water. Now that the paint underneath is now set up a little bit, so now that that's a little bit dry, I can go over, because I paint quite thin there, I can go back over it with some lighter tones, and they won't all bleed in together. The water that's in the foreground here has a lot more kind of reds in it, and more natural tones. It's closer to the shoreline. There's more stuff mixed up, whereas the water in the distance got a lot more sort of rich blues in it. So I like that contrast. It's going to break it up and keep it from being just too monotone. All right, Robert, you take care. Happy painting to you. I'm going to wrap up here anyway. It's been a little while. And sort of that's the first stages of getting things underway from the field to the studio. Make a little room for this rock over here that I was working on earlier. Try to cut its shape back using negative space. And it's nice as though the shadows in this corner, it looks like in the end, are going to serve the purpose of what I was wanting to. Though the rocks aren't going to come down across the bottom like I was originally thinking. Looks like the shadows themselves will serve that purpose. The reflections here to break it up from coming. There we go. You get the idea. So the shadows there are going to serve that purpose of what I was hoping for earlier. So I think that I'm going to call it a break as well now. We'll get you guys back over here. Turn it around here for a sec. Ugh. See if I can manage this. Don't mind the camera for a second. We're going to have to go this way. All right. Here we go. So, thank you guys for joining me today. This has been a technical challenge as usual, but hopefully we'll get around those as we go along. And if there's interest, I'll keep doing some more of these down the road. But this is a bit of the process from the field to the canvas, and now a lot of hours in here trying to sort of build on the experience in the field, to pour that into here, and hopefully when it's all done, people watching it, looking at it, will be able to feel what it was like to sit next to the ocean up here in Greenland. So thank you very much, guys, for joining me today. Thanks for putting up with all, again, the tech issues.